Hi, this is Dennis Dalton, Safety Officer at the Peterson Aero Club. And this is a safety meeting briefing for June 29th, 2021. Aero Club Director of Operations and Safety directed this flight safety review, which we're going to do this evening. So that's the topic. And there's a memo that they put out that I got from Justin, and there's been an increase in Aero Club flight mishaps due to poor flight preparation, lack of checklist discipline, failure to follow published guidance regulations, faulty judgment, and bad decision making. In the previous 6 months, there have been 4 major incidents, mishaps, that the Air Force Aero Clubs have experienced. We're going to discuss these 4 accidents, which they sent in that memo, with emphasis on regulation compliance, checklist discipline, flight preparation, and decision making, which was outlined in the memo that they wanted us to cover those accidents in relationship to those 4 areas. And then to wrap up the safety meeting by discussing bounce landings and crosswind landings, which is what a lot of these are about. I know that last month's safety briefing actually did cover 3 accidents in Colorado, one of them from the Air Force Academy. None of those were these. These were all Aero Club accidents, and although one of ours as an Aero Club airplane was in last month's briefing, that was an older accident. And those were all related to wind, and we were looking at wind issues. These are from the Air Force Aero Club people that are running this that wanted these things focused on. So what I did was I put on the left-hand side here, you'll see I put the aircraft accident, a very simple description that was given to us, and then the 4 areas they wanted us to cover. I simply went into the AFMAN and the SOPs and tried to pull out things that I thought were relevant, and then in some cases I have some comments about that. So the first one was a 172R, so all of these are 172 T-41s. This one's a 172R. Actually, one of them is an Aero. Aircraft crashed on the runway of Hope Airport, an unmonitored field, due to the main landing gear digging into soft snow, causing an unstable landing. Resulted in a total loss of the aircraft. No injuries were sustained to the student pilot or the instructor pilot. Now, the other thing is 2 of these are student pilots for private. So they're student pilot instructors, and the other 2 are student solo accidents. So the first one, regulation compliance, checking current weather and NOTAMs for existing field conditions as part of pre-flight planning may or may not have been the main thing you could have worked on here as far as avoiding this accident. Checklist discipline, well, the soft field landing right out of the T-41 manual is for landing on soft or unprepared surface. Fly a full flap approach. As for short field landing, plan to touch down with minimum descent rate practical. After touchdown, hold the nose wheel off the ground as long as possible. Flight preparation, AFMAN 41766, when approaching non-towered airfield with unknown runway surface or approach conditions, pilots shall make a low approach to the landing runway to determine surface conditions before making an approach to landing. And decision making, the flight instructor, in parentheses, acts as pilot in command of the aircraft while conducting the flight instruction. This accident was in January. Drifting snow is common and may not be indicated on NOTAMs as they need to be called in, on uncontrolled fields by the airport manager. Many approved landing airstrips on our SOPs, like La Habana, Lamar, and Spanish Peaks and Trinidad, can have drifts on an open runway that has no NOTAMs. That could easily cause this type of accident. So I would say probably what I put under flight preparation was probably the most, to me, if it was unknown, I mean, one low pass is good practice, and low pass to me is 50 feet to really look it over, or if not, to be ready to go around. And I guess under checklist discipline, soft field and go around would have been the two options there. The next one, 172, solo student pilot reported tail of aircraft rising up after landing, which caused the propeller to strike the ground. Most probable cause is due to a hard landing with subsequent bounce and improper recovery procedures by the student pilot. Damage to propeller, no injuries were sustained by the student pilot. Regulation compliance, well, we have out of 622, 1, 2, and 8, solo student pilots should not fly when actual or forecast crosswind component for takeoff or landing exceeds 10 knots. And I'll say something about this in a minute here. These are just a couple I pulled out, which all have to do with wind, though. Student pilots should not fly when the actual forecast surface winds are 20 knots. And this third one, all dual portions of supervised solo flights shall include 3 student landings and 1 go-around at the airfield where student will solo. Flight instructors shall ensure adequate student proficiency and be present at the airport during solo portion of the flight. That particular one there would mean to me mostly in terms of regulations, that's more than likely what happened here, in my opinion. Checklist discipline, when a go-around is required at low altitude, proceed as follows. Right out of the T41 manual, throttle full in, 2, flaps up. But raise the flaps to 20 only as soon as conditions permit. Raise the flaps to 0 degrees after maintaining a minimum of 85 miles an hour. Flight preparation. Solo student pilots shall not fly when the actual forecast wind component for takeoff or landing exceeds 10 knots. So same thing as you had up here in regulations. Student pilots shall not fly when the actual forecast surface wind exceeds 20 knots, same as up here. And all dual portions of supervised solo flight shall include the 3 landings and go around where he will solo. So again, flight preparation and regulation compliance is pretty similar in this one from my point of view. Flight instructor is responsible for the flight instruction. This accident, could have been the result of improper flaring technique, as well as where wind, was not a factor probably. Making sure students only solo at runways they have done acceptable landings and go-arounds as outlined in the aft man would help, to support a successful landing flare with unfamiliar cues, because that can really cause a person flaring the airplane to do exactly what happened here. Additional flying time and logbook hours can sometimes be a deterrent to sufficient preparation at airports a student will use that are not in the immediate vicinity. I know I've had that challenge myself a lot where you just, they've done it, but by the time they're going on their solo cross country, it could have been a few weeks. It's not like they're going up and doing their solos. So it's a lot of responsibility on flight instructors. And it's just one of those things we have to go over. This one's an Aero. Description, aircraft landing gear did not deploy while landing at Perry, Houston County, causing aircraft to land and skid on belly. Significant damage is still being assessed. No injuries to pilot or instructor pilot. This incident is still pending a complete investigation by the FAA and Air Force Safety. I would just have to say a thing about gear up landings are not accidents, they're incidents. Regulation compliance. Well, the flight instructor is responsible for the flight. Acts as pilot in command of the aircraft while conducting flight instruction. Checklist. Well, yeah, a methodical, mandatory use of checklist could have prevented this gear up landing, but we've had a few with club aircraft here as well. So it's the old adage, those that have and those that are going to, rather than those that have and those that haven't. Flight preparation, crew resource management, who's flying, who's reading the checklist. Responsibility for the flight, well, it really is the flight instructor, but if you have a seasoned person being checked out in a retrack, it sometimes takes extra diligence, in my opinion, to be very clear about who's got the last word and who's doing what, and who is really going to double check what. So, and it's being focused on the final and not, having a sterile cockpit. That could be part of checklist as well, because it's very easy to, as some people know, it's very easy to miss that and the gear's up. Decision making, flight instructor is responsible for flight instruction. Stops any club pilot, whether local or transient, from flying when in the instructor's judgment flight safety may be compromised. Also acts as pilot in command of aircraft while conducting flight instruction. So there is a lot of responsibility. I will do a repetitive cross check of gear extension at downwind, base, and final. Well, usually it's in visual conditions when you're in the pattern, it's going to be mid downwind. And on instruments, it's final approach fix for me. That's there at the same place, but I'll still check it. I'll check it if I do it on instruments at final approach fix. I'm going to do it again. If I'm visual, I'm going to do it 3 times. I'm going to do it downwind, base, and final. I might even do it 4 times. Well, I may not be on the checklist to be more than once. It's one way to increase odds in your favor. Okay, the last one, T41C, description. Solo student, pilot, struck left wingtip and propeller on the ground. While landing at Grants Airport on a solo cross-country, due to experiencing a wind gust on landing and overcompensating control inputs for crosswind, winds at Grants were 230 at 7, gust 16, but the windsock was hanging dead. When overflying the field, there was significant damage to the left wing and propeller. No injuries to the student pilot. Well, let's see, regulation compliance. Well, we're back to the wind again. Should not fly when actual forecast wind crosswind component exceeds 10 knots. Well, that may have not. It doesn't say here what runway he was on, so I can't really compute that. Students shall not fly when actual forecast wind exceeds 20. Well, this does not. Okay, all dual portions of supervised solo flights shall include 3 student landings and 1 go-around at the airfield where the student will solo. Flight instructor shall ensure adequate student proficiency and be present at the airport during the solo portion of the flight. Well, checklist. When a go-around is required at low altitude, proceed as follows. Throttle full in, flaps up, raise flaps to 20. As soon as conditions permit, raise flaps to 0 degrees after maintaining a minimum of 85 miles an hour. Flight preparation for this kind of flight, well, again, I'm not sure if this was his home field or says solo cross country, so I think this is more pertinent here. On the first 2 solo cross country flights, a student shall fly airfields where they have previously demonstrated satisfactory patterns to a flight instructor. Decision making. Flight instructor is responsible for flight instruction. Mastering crosswind and takeoff on landing, these techniques are not usually perfected at solo. So, wind limits by the SOPs are to be taken as, in my opinion, as absolute maximum values. And I usually prefer less. I know it's by individual student, but I still prefer less. 20 knots in Kansas is not 20 knots in Colorado, because 20 knots in Kansas or Missouri or Ohio is a steady 20 knots, not here. So you're ending up with these gusts. You're ending up with what he said, the windsock hanging dead. Well, how long did you look at it? You could have been looking at it and it was dead. As soon as you looked away, that thing was standing straight out, so you don't know. And that's what it's like around here. So that's just some of the things, just trying to mitigate these things. Okay, bounce landings and crosswind landings. Last month, I had this chart up. And I did reword a few of these things which I had on the chart last month, and I'll just talk about them again here real quick. Bounce landings could have been flare, but it's airspeed control, obviously, flaring too high and airspeed control. Crosswind landings is what this diagram is about. This is crosswind takeoff technique, but also is the same technique for landing only in reverse, and I'll talk about that real quick. First of all, this total gust factor about crosswind, and also could be for bounce landings. Flaring high with gusts, you could run out of wind real quick and it would drop and bounce, which could surprise you if you were just a little slow. So total gust factor, maintaining an airspeed that factored in a gust factor based on pilot experience, which is 1/2 the gust factor added to your approach speed, could prevent the airplane from approaching a stall speed when too high, thus bouncing the airplane on the runway. It probably wouldn't bounce if it was going faster, because it wouldn't have stalled too high. But again, that's only one component of this. Wind direction versus runway direction, improper crosswind technique can cause the airplane to drift off the runway, the aileron into the wind with appropriate rudder to keep the airplane aligned with runway centers, the appropriate technique. We'll talk about this here in a minute. I wanted to talk about the runway length and width, because narrow runways require more precise crosswind technique. Shorter runways require more precise airspeed control. So again, these at Colorado Springs, we have quite large, long runways, 150 feet wide. And so having issues when the students on cross country and they go to the smaller airports, the visual sight picture is a lot different. And I think what I'm seeing here is that the emphasis could be more on how the student is adapting to the runways that they don't use as often as here. Recency of experience, it can be an important factor. Here I am blocking out my own copy again by my head. Basically, students need to be supervised so as not to exceed their capabilities. So again, this if you didn't look at this one last month, if you're taking off of the wind coming from this direction, again, these are full deflection controls. This would be almost a complete aileron to the left all the way to the stops. And rudder is needed for direction, which is probably going to be just a little bit right now. You get this thing rolling, and you notice how this airplane in this picture is tipped, or you're approaching rotation speed, but you're not there yet. The aileron into the wind, you're going to have to start getting rid of some of that, because as the ailerons become effective, then the airplane will start to bank. And then you will need more rudder to keep it in the center, because it will tend to want to turn to the left. And again, those types of inputs are a lot, then less, and then maybe less as needed. And then here you let go of all of them and crab it. Okay. But okay, then here they have hold aileron into the wind, bank into into wind, rudder as needed. So again, I'm just reiterating that where you have to use a lot of aileron and a little rudder. Here you're going to need more rudder and maybe a little less aileron, maybe the same aileron or a little less and more rudder. Once you get airborne and you're established in a VY climb, then you let go and you level the wings. I don't mean let go, but you level the wings and neutralize the rudders but you slowly level the wings so that you're now crabbing into the wind in order to track straight down the runway. Landing would be the same thing. As you get closer to the flare, you're using more and more control inputs in order to keep the airplane on the center line of the runway. As you may remember, have seen in the first picture of this presentation, I think that was a Blanca Citabria flaring in on one wheel. And you could tell that's exactly what was going on. They were nose high with the wing high wheel. It was going to hit first. And it was a very, it's a real choreographed dance, but that's how you have to do it. Okay, so that's the presentation. Oh wait, I got one more here. The drawing. I think he's doing a drawing. So if he is drawing for free flight, here we are on that. Okay, this is Dennis Dalton for the safety meeting presentation for June 29th, 2021. Stay safe.